In September 1983, a Soviet officer was sitting in a bunker outside Moscow when the early warning system told him that the United States had launched a missile at his country. Then it told him there were 5. His instructions were simple: confirm the alert and pass it up the chain immediately, because at that range there were roughly 20 minutes before impact, and every minute spent thinking was a minute the Soviet Union could not use to respond. He decided the system was broken. He had no evidence. He had no way to check. He just decided he was right. And that's the pattern in all 4 of these. Every time the world came close, the thing that stopped it was something nobody had planned for. Stanislav Petrov was a lieutenant colonel, and on the night of the 26th of September, he was not even supposed to be on duty. He was covering someone else's shift. The timing could not have been worse. 3 weeks earlier, a Soviet fighter had shot down a Korean airliner that strayed into Soviet airspace, killing everyone aboard, including Americans. Relations were about as bad as they had been in 20 years. Both sides were expecting something. At just after midnight, the panel in front of him lit up with the word for launch: 1 missile, then within minutes, 5. And here is what he actually did, which is the part worth understanding. He thought about the number. 5 missiles is a strange attack. If the United States were starting a nuclear war, it would not open with 5. It would open with everything, all at once, to destroy the ability to reply. 5 was not an opening move. 5 was a system saying something odd. He also knew the satellite network was new, and that new systems produce false readings. So he picked up the phone and reported it as a malfunction, which at that moment was a guess he was making with the whole thing resting on it. The cause turned out to be sunlight. High-altitude cloud, at a particular angle, at a particular time of year, reflecting into the satellite's sensors in a way that looked exactly like a launch plume. Petrov was not decorated. He was questioned. His logbook was found to be incomplete, and the incident stayed classified for a decade. He left the military not long afterward and lived quietly. He said later that he never thought of it as heroic. He said the system was young, and he simply didn't trust it yet. 21 years earlier, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest call of the entire Cold War happened underwater, and neither government knew about it at the time. Soviet submarine B-59 was operating near Cuba. It had been submerged for a long stretch and had lost contact with Moscow. No orders, no news, nothing. The air conditioning had failed. Temperatures inside were reportedly over 40 degrees, carbon dioxide was building, men were passing out. American destroyers found them and began dropping practice depth charges, small explosives intended not to sink the submarine, but to force it to the surface. Nobody aboard B-59 knew they were practice charges. What the crew experienced was explosions against the hull, for hours, with no way to ask anyone what was happening on the surface. What Washington and Moscow also did not know was that the submarine was carrying a torpedo with a nuclear warhead. By the accounts of men who were there, the captain concluded that war had already broken out above them, and ordered the torpedo readied. The political officer agreed, but by most accounts, launching it required 3 senior officers to agree, and the third was Vasily Arkhipov, who was aboard as chief of staff of the whole flotilla. He refused. There was an argument in a hot metal room, with explosions going off outside, between exhausted men who had not slept properly in days. And he held. The submarine surfaced instead into American searchlights and eventually went home. If that torpedo had been fired, a nuclear weapon would have detonated inside an American naval formation during the tensest week of the Cold War. Nobody credible believes that ends there. Arkhipov received no particular recognition. He continued his career and died in 1998, before most of the world had heard his name. Both of those came down to one person deciding not to believe what they were being told. The next 2 didn't. In the next 2, nobody was heroic. Nobody refused an order, and nobody worked anything out. They just came very close, for ordinary reasons, a science experiment, and a mechanical failure over a field. January 1995. The Cold War had been over for years. A team of Norwegian and American scientists launched a research rocket from Andøya, an island off the northwest coast of Norway. Its job was to study the aurora, the northern lights. It was a completely routine scientific launch, and Norway had notified its neighbors in advance, including Russia, exactly as it was supposed to. The notification did not reach the people watching the radar. What they saw was a launch off the Norwegian coast, climbing fast on a trajectory and at a speed that in the first moments resembled a submarine-launched missile of the type that might be used to open an attack. A single warhead detonated high above a country to blind its radar before the rest arrive. Russian nuclear command procedures began, and the Chejit, the briefcase that a Russian president carries, the equivalent of the American one, was activated and brought to Boris Yeltsin. It is the only publicly known occasion on which that has happened. Within a few minutes, it became clear that the rocket was heading away from Russia, out over the sea, and the alert was stood down. Nobody in this story made a mistake. Exactly. The scientists followed the rules. Norway sent the notice. Russian radar operators saw an unexplained launch and reported it, which was their job. A piece of paper simply didn't reach the right desk. 3 years after everyone had agreed the dangerous part was over. 3 of the 4 stories so far have been Soviet. That is not because the Soviet Union was more dangerous, it's because of what has been declassified and when. So, here's an American one. January 1961, a B-52 bomber was flying a routine patrol over North Carolina, carrying 2 hydrogen bombs. Each one was in the multi-megaton range, vastly more powerful than the weapon used on Hiroshima. The aircraft developed a serious fuel leak. The wing failed. The bomber broke apart in the air over farmland near a town called Goldsboro, and both weapons fell out. One of them behaved exactly as though it had been dropped on purpose. Its parachute deployed. It went through its arming sequence on the way down. When it was recovered, investigators found that several of the steps required for detonation had completed. A declassified United States government assessment, written a couple of years later, concluded that a single switch had stood between that bomb and a full detonation over North Carolina. The other weapon came down without its parachute and broke apart on impact in a waterlogged field. Most of it was recovered. Part of it, including highly enriched uranium, was never found. It is still down there. The land above it is restricted to this day. Nobody had done anything wrong. No enemy was involved. A plane had a fuel leak, and the outcome came down to hardware. That's the point of putting this one last. The danger in all 4 of these was never really the other side. It was the number of things in the system that could go wrong on an ordinary Tuesday. These systems were built deliberately to take judgment out of the process. Speed was the whole design goal. There would be minutes, not hours, and a chain of command that hesitated was a chain of command that lost. And then every single time it came close, what saved it was something the design had not accounted for. A man who looked at 5 missiles and thought the number was wrong. A man who wouldn't give a third vote in a hot metal room. A trajectory that curved away in time. A switch that held. 2 of those were people. 2 of them were luck. That's the part worth sitting with. Half of these were not saved by anybody at all. They were saved by a rocket going the right direction and a piece of hardware doing what it was supposed to, on a night when several other pieces hadn't. And the 2 men who were involved were not senior, not famous, and were never really thanked. One of them was covering someone else's shift. Neither thought he had done anything remarkable. Both said, more or less, that they were simply the person who happened to be sitting there. And if you want the opposite of this, the times nobody hesitated and everybody was certain, and it went exactly as badly as it sounds, that one's on the screen now.